This is the Fight Back podcast, hosted by Georgia Berry. If you're passionate about martial arts, mental health, and women lifting up women, then stay right where you are, babe. This podcast is for you.
You need to know that nobody shapes me but me.
Steph, I'm going to let you take it away first by introducing yourself and telling everyone a bit about you.
Well, I'm here in Chicago. So anybody from my account who's joining, you probably know that. And I am a somatic experiencing practitioner for trauma therapy. And I also do biodynamic breathwork for trauma release. So my background is really body-based, trauma healing. And, you know, I've got a background in yoga and Reiki, which is energy work, meditation. And that's been really my focus for the past, I don't even know. I mean, I've been practicing yoga for about 20 years now, but I've been teaching this type of stuff, body-based healing, for about 12 years. And then I got into more of the somatic therapy and breath work, really deep breath work, probably about 4 years ago. And it's changed my entire life. And it's just so near and dear to me because of the impact it's had on me. And I've seen now hundreds of people, and I've worked with just hundreds of different people from all walks of life. And when people are able to finally feel into their bodies and release like big emotions and feel their feelings and release trauma that has really held them back for so long, it's I don't know, it's just such a beautiful, beautiful thing to be able to, one, witness, and then also to be able to now teach after I've learned. And so, yeah, it's really my passion now.
Okay, let's start at the start. How did you first get into teaching yoga in this sort of style, the body-based yoga, the experiencing trauma? What prompted it? Why did you start?
So actually, I used to be in investment banking. I went to college and I did finance in Utah at Utah State University. And I had this big dream of going to the big city and working in a high rise and being this big like finance whiz person. And I did it. And I loved it for like a couple years. And then I realized that for me, it was not actually the dream that I really wanted in my life. And so it kind of came down to this really pivotal moment. It's like, do I follow this dream that I've worked so hard for? And I studied in college and kind of what was expected of me, or do I just throw all caution to the wind and run away to an ashram in Hawaii and study yoga, breathwork, and meditation? So that's what I decided to. Thank you, Anthony. And so that's what I did, is I just realized that I really had this pivotal choice. Do I have the courage to dream a new dream or not? And I did. And I just did it. And it really, immersing myself in meditation, breathwork, and yoga for so long during this immersion program, it was the base of everything for me. And so that's where the very beginning was. This was back in about 2008. I mean, Instagram, all this stuff never exist before. I did have a blog that I was religiously writing on. But yeah, so that's when it all started, is when back in Kona, Hawaii, at the ashram.
And then I know there's been a few different things that you've personally been working on healing from a trauma perspective, but how did trauma first show up in your life? Like, how did it feel in your body? Where did it present itself? Like, what happened there?
That's such a good question. So if you would have asked me even 7 years ago what trauma was, I would have been like, oh, it's for people who've been to war, or people who have these big sexual traumas or been in a car wreck. I only classify trauma as these big T traumas. And it took going through something as an adult, sexual trauma as an adult, to finally kind of wake myself up to, oh, I do have like way more trauma in my life. And it did start with something that was bigger, and at first I had no idea what was going on. Like, I had no idea that trauma was even trauma, even when it was happening to me. And that's very, very typical is, I'm going to speak just from my own experience, but from what I talk to a lot of women about as well, you think, one, it's not that bad. Two, I just don't want to think about it. You disassociate, you freeze from everything. I didn't think it was that bad. And honestly, I'll just get really real here with you.
Mm-hmm.
So how I knew finally that trauma really had presented was I was with a partner, and it was a very consensual. He was a very wonderful man. And it was after the first time that we slept together. And the next morning I woke up and it was like this rage took over me. And I looked over at him and it was like, oh my God, I want to like kill you. And I don't know why. And I'm not going to kill anybody, but it was this overwhelming, like, rah. It just I felt so dirty and rageful and just angry, even though I just had this, consensual, beautiful experience with a partner. And it was at that point when I realized, oh my God, I've got something wrong. Like, something is actually not okay. And so that's the first time that I realized something was not all right. And I needed to get deeper into what is actually going on here. And that's kind of when everything blew open for me. And that was really the beginning of like the deep dive into trauma healing for me.
And what has that process looked like? What sort of things have you done in your practice for yourself to release that trauma?
Yeah, so the first thing that I did was I signed up for this retreat. And I know, not everybody has, I feel very fortunate that I was able to even go to this retreat. And I had no idea what it was. It's called Path of Love. And it's a 7-day personal development retreat, but it's really a somatic-based trauma therapy retreat. All of the facilitators are trained in somatic experiencing. And it was there when I was really able to dive into my feelings, and I was able to feel, and not only feel, but express my feelings. And it was at that point when I realized, oh, really bad shit has happened, and it's okay to feel it in this safe container. And I was able to get angry, and like primal angry, and have somebody hold me in that anger and be met by other women. It was co-ed, but some of my most powerful moments were, face to face with another woman, just primal roaring and screaming and just getting out that anger. It's like scraping out all the gunk at the bottom of my soul. And so for me, personally, being able to really tap into those feelings of anger and rage was the biggest step that I could take. And it's interesting because now I understand, when we have something traumatic happen to us, whether it's sexual trauma, violence, neglect, any sort of big trauma, little trauma, we often go into some sort of a freeze state or collapse. And this often happens, especially with childhood sexual abuse, because we can't really fight back. The person's bigger, or you can't run away. And so your body just collapses. And so I found for me that I went into this like chronic freeze state and disassociation. And once I started to unthaw and come out of this, it's like, whoosh, there's the anger that never got to be released. And that's very natural and it's very beautiful. And so, you know, especially like when I work with clients and they start to come out, they're like, why am I so pissed off all the time? I'm like, this is a beautiful thing. This is your power coming back. So yeah, that was for me, definitely the biggest step was starting to get in touch with my own power and my anger again, and then also feeling the grief and the sadness and learning how to also contain it.
So that would be like your journey into expanding your window of tolerance, right? I guessing initially it was very small, and so you were going straight into the freeze mode and then kind of into that fight or flight, like that really like primal anger, emotional mode, and then on the fringes of that, how have you then progressed that past that into really expanding your window of tolerance to the point that you're at today?
Yeah, so the biggest thing I think that I had to learn was, you know, so let's say this is our nervous system right here, right? So we are naturally going to kind of be a little bit wavy. We're going to have times of a little bit higher energy and a little bit lower energy. We're going to go into the sympathetic and parasympathetic. But how I was living was in this freeze state. So I was taking a deep dive here, and then all of a sudden I would get anxious, which sends you here, which eventually you're going to collapse because that's such high energy. So it's like your life just goes like this. And it's so exhausting when you finally realize that you've been living in a state where you're ping-ponging back and forth, and it's really difficult to find that regulation. And another way that I finally realized that I was living like this was, it was actually an exercise that we did in one of my somatic experiencing courses. And they had us just go outside with a partner and walk around and really tune in to what we were feeling in our body. And as I was walking around outside, I was like looking behind every tree. I was looking like under the freaking rocks for, you know, waiting for the next attack to happen. It's like a car would drive by and I'd be like, did you see the way they looked? Like, you think they're going to get out of the car and like come attack us? Or, you know, just constantly, I was just in this hyper vigilant state. And my partner's like, what is going on? Like, we're just outside, like in this beautiful park. Like, I'm not thinking any of these things. And I looked at her and I was like, doesn't everybody walk around outside just waiting to be attacked? And she's like, no, I don't think so. And that was the first time too that I was like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. And I went back into the classroom and I just dropped down in the back of the room and cried. I just sat in the back of the room and cried. And I was like, I am so exhausted from living this way. I need to learn how to come from this window into more regulation. And so that's constantly what my personal practice has been, is when something is triggered or when something happens, I don't go into panic, anxiety. We don't go into hypervigilance, but you also don't collapse and you're like, I can't move. I'm lethargic. I feel depressed. So it's being able to bounce and swing back and forth in a very regulated way. And that's what we all need to kind of strive to do. So if we're anxious, we're really living in this high sympathetic state, and eventually you're going to crash. And if you're living in this frozen state, you really can't access that life force energy that gives you motivation to follow your purpose and follow into your power and to really stand in who you are. So this is the range that we all need to work to get to. But if you don't have the tools and you don't realize it, that's when you get blown out in either way.
And when people do realize that they're moving outside of their window of tolerance, how does breath work help them work through that?
So the biggest thing that breath work does is it brings presence to the now. And even just taking the smallest breath, like in through the nose and out through the mouth. And if you do that 3 to 5 times, all of a sudden your nervous system is like, oh, okay. So this is, if you're starting to feel anxiety and panic. So would be if you're up here, it's like, oh, okay, I'm here. I'm safe. I'm alive, and that buys you 30 seconds to be able to look around and realize, okay, pending you're in a safe situation, that you can, maybe you can come back to resource and like feel into your body, feel your skin. I'm okay right now. And it allows you to come back down into the present.
And now you've taken this incredible journey that you've been on through experiencing trauma, realizing you had trauma, and healing from that trauma, now to be at the point where you've been able to start Krav Maga. So that's the connection, how we first met. First, for everyone who doesn't know what Krav Maga is, can you explain it?
Yeah, and I'm going to do the best I can, and I know that my teacher's going to be watching this, and I'm like, I feel like I hope I do it okay. So Krav Maga is a martial art, and it's what they've trained the Israeli military in, from my knowledge. And please correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody jumps in, if this is wrong, like, you can correct me. And the way that I am trained with my teachers is it's really, they're teaching us for street fighting, for, you know, what to do if you get attacked. Like, somebody comes up and bear hugs you or traps you or chokes you or pins you down on the ground. How do you escape in that 5 to 15 seconds that you have? How do you not freeze? How do you escape? How do you fight back? How do you do the most damage to this person that you can? It's not like we're going to slap them in the face. No, like, we want to do damage to their body. And my teacher always says, concuss the brain and destroy the frame. So you go for the pelvic region and you go for the head, and you have 5 to 15 seconds to do as much damage as you can and get the hell out. So that's really how they train in my studio.
Yeah, so it's pretty much the most full contact, most full on martial art there is. I think one of the things that you and I have spoken about that makes it so interesting is that it's not a sport. So you're not training to compete in Krav Maga. It's literally street fighting. So MMA, Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, those are all sports. They have a rule set that you're working within. Krav Maga is like, no, fuck rules. We're here to save our lives in a street situation or win a street fight. So it's very real. Like, what drew you to starting such an intense, well, it's not a sport, such an intense activity?
Yeah, so that's funny that you say that too, because that's a second mantra that they teach us. Because if we mess up, because we're going to mess up, you know, like not get our moves right, and they always say just fuck up violently. Like, we're going to mess up and just fuck up violently and get out. So it really is. It's no rules. It's do as much damage and get out. It's really made for street fighting. And it is funny because it does fit my personality. I have a little bit of an intense person. I kind of have a lot of an intense personality, which once again, I'm trying to keep in my range. But what drew me to it is I randomly saw somebody on Instagram doing it, and I was like, oh, that looks pretty cool. Like, I've always wanted to do a martial art, but I just never knew which one. But when I was at my breathwork practitioner training, specifically for trauma, I had just done a couple sessions, and I was sitting around the table with a couple different guys that I had become really good friends with. And I apparently was getting very heated and passionate about something. And he looked over at me and he's like, have you ever just considered doing Krav Maga? Because I think it could help with your anger and it could really be a great release for you. And so I was like, no, but that's the second time I've heard of it. So I'm going to go and I'm going to check it out. And so I went home and I wrote every single school in Chicago. And I was like, fuck it, we're just going to try this out. We're going to see what happens and go for it. So the school that I go to is called Krav Maga Force, and they're in Chicago. And he wrote me back pretty immediately. And so that's the school that I've been with ever since. I've been with the same 2 instructors, and they are phenomenal. So yeah, and after my first class, I was really just hooked because it was such a great release.
Okay, so your first class, did any trauma come up? Obviously, if you were hooked, it was a pretty good experience. What happened in the first class?
Absolutely. It was such a great experience. And, you know, they just kind of throw you right in. You know, they're like, okay, now we're going to do 75 burpees, 75 push-ups, 75 whatever. And I was like, are you kidding? This is the warm up. And I was like, all right, bring it on. I've done an Ironman. I've done all this. I can do this workout. So I did it, and you know, they took it really slow for me, but I was able to feel that power of hitting. And for me, what it felt like was the fighting back that I never was able to do as a child and as an adult. And there was something really just empowering about it. And I remember I left class that day, and even after one class, walking down the street, I was kind of like, you want to mess with me? I know how to hit now. You want to mess with me? Oh, I see you. I see what's going on around here. And I just felt so much more empowered. Mind you, I had done like one class, and I would have broken my hand if I actually hit something like reals. You know, I didn't even know how to punch properly, but it instilled some sort of a confidence in me. And immediately I could tell how passionate the instructors were about teaching. And so it was just a very pleasant experience right from the get-go.
Yeah, that shift in the way that you show up in the world when you have experienced the power that your body is capable of, I think is one of the main things, or in my opinion, is one of the main things about martial arts that makes them so healing for trauma and so important for women. It's not just that you think you know what to do in a situation like that, like in a self-defense situation, like as we've just said, sometimes you physically can't, right? You're being held down, or you are in a relationship with the person who's attacking you. So you know if you fight back, then they're just going to hit you again an hour later. So sometimes submission is the only option, but changing the way that you show up in the world is one of the things that you can change. And that has far-reaching consequences. That makes other people treat you differently. That makes you treat yourself differently, most importantly. And you know, that's really how we start to change our lives, which is very, very beautiful. I want to pivot to some of the more negative experiences that you had while training in Krav Maga. So there was an incident. Can you talk everyone through what happened?
Yeah, so actually this was pretty recent, and I train with mostly men, and I mean, most everybody's bigger than me in the class, and the men have really become a lot of really good friends for me. I've made a lot of really great friends. I've talked so much with my instructor and my teacher. I've talked with him from the beginning. I was like, wow, this is really powerful. I was like, how often do you have like women breaking down and crying in your office? Because this is bringing up a lot. And like, it brings up a lot for me. Sometimes it's overwhelming, you know, when we're in a hitting drill and we're just going. And all of a sudden I realize that I'm not even in my body anymore. You know, I've gone back to that disassociated, you know, I'm there and I'm going through the motions, but I'm not even really present in the room anymore. And so I've talked a lot with him about it. And even during some of the drills, you know, he'll give us like a time to go like full force. And I'm like, I can't actually do that. He's like, well, go as long as you can and then ease up. And so I would do that in some of the different drills, but we were drilling out this really intense round, and it was me and 3 men who were probably all above 6'2", massive guys. And the thing is everybody gets really like, we're all really in it, and the men know like you can hit me, you like, you know, I've really put off like I want to be one of the guys, I want to be a guy, like treat me, you know, hit me hard, like don't go easy or whatever. Even if I start to go here, just I didn't want to appear weak, I think is ultimately what it came down to. I did not want to appear weak to all these men because I've been striving to appear powerful and strong. So we were in the middle of this intense drill, and I got kicked a guy was doing a front kick, and it hit like right in my like womb, like right below my belly button. And he kicked so hard, and it almost knocked me over. I flew like 10 feet back, and it was this moment that there was just this primal, it's like my body came out and started and just yelled like, no more. I will never be hurt by a man again. And but I immediately disassociated because I kind of had to go back in. And so I was there in the room, but my body completely froze. But it was also like this, like awakening of no more. So I made it through the class. I bolted out and I just broke down and I started bawling. And I was like, I'm never going back. I never want to be hit by a man again. Mind you, these guys, nobody did anything wrong. I want to preempt that. But it was just this like, I never want to be hit again. I will never be hit again, even in a class by a man, because it hurt and it just didn't feel good. And so I actually quit going for about 4 weeks. And in that time is when I met you. And I have to say that you truly changed everything for me. Like the conversation that we had in private, when you were like, girl, you got to get back in there. And you need to get in there and you need to speak up and you need to use your voice. And there is nothing wrong with you saying, I'm not doing this drill. I'm not ready to do this. I don't want to do that. Like, I'm going to disassociate if I do that. Don't hit me this hard. But you told me, you're like, get in there and use your voice. And as a woman in a male-dominated sport, you can make a real difference if you just go in there and you use your voice. And it took you actually giving me permission to step out, to know that I could step out of some of the drills. Because some of the drills we do, like with our eyes closed and spinning, they're really intense for me. But it took you giving me this like permission. And I think like this woman to woman permission to say, no, this is not okay for me yet. This is out of my range. You're going to blow me into panic or into freeze if I do this. To be able to finally, it took like another week or so, but I finally walked back into class and I did. I found my voice back in the classroom. And it was really beautiful. But it's like I felt so long like I had to keep up with all these boys, but I'm not a man. I'm not a 6'2" guy. Like I can't take being hit as hard as somebody else can. That's just never gonna happen. And I have a lot of trauma in my past. I have a lot of trauma with men in my past. And so there's going to be times when I'm going to be intensely triggered. And so it really did. It took like this miracle, magical, like meeting you to give me this permission and tell me to get my ass back in there, because I do love it, to be able to finally walk back in and to be able to use my voice.
Yeah, I think, for me, I've been training for a long time in martial arts, and I have many, many female friends, and it takes a while, and it shouldn't, but if you just go the natural path, it seems to take a while before you have enough like self-esteem and enough confidence in yourself as a fighter to be able to say, you're going too hard with me, I want to go lighter, to get to that point where you're not trying to prove yourself. I think all women have this like, no, like if I'm in MMA, if I'm in martial arts, it's because I'm tough, like I'm not like other girls, you can go hard with me, and we really want to prove that. There's just nothing to prove. Someone who's so much bigger than you, they're always going to be stronger, so you don't have to show it. So even I don't consider that I have experienced any significant trauma, but it's pretty full on to be beat up by a guy who's much bigger than me. And I have a lot of sisters in the gym, they're my family, who I am very strong on saying, you need to know when to say things are going too hard for you so that we can all continue to grow. And guys they're not aware. That's the other thing. We can't put it on them, and you're not and I'm not, and no one is saying it's men's fault, they don't look after women enough. They just don't realize how much stronger that they are than us. But as soon as you realize that you don't have to prove anything and you don't have to show that you are tough, you can just say, then that's when the whole training experience really changes, and you start to come into yourself and become like that's really when you become a badass woman. When you can do that, that's when you're a badass. Beforehand, you kind of just like an ego, right?
Yes. Oh my God, you nailed that. Yes, I love that. Because that's what it was. And that's when I felt like the badass, like fighter warrior girl, woman, walking into that class. And I had some of the guys after class, and one of them kind of asked me, because I'd been gone for so long. And, I'm sitting there with the guys, and I literally, the words that came out of my mouth were, yeah, I've taken this break because my pussy said no more getting hit by a man that hard ever again. And I literally said those words verbatim. And they kind of all just like everybody kind of paused for a second. And I was like, did those words just come out of my mouth? Did I just tell them that my pussy said they can't hit me that hard anymore? And I was like, oh yeah, I did. And they all were like, that you feel that deep then, don't you? And I was like, oh, it's deep. I feel that deep. And you know what it did is it opened the door for this beautiful conversation with all of these amazing men. And they were like, thank you. Because sometimes, when we're in there with other women and we're fighting, they get mad because we're not going as hard. Like, why don't you go harder? Like, don't treat me like a woman, treat me like one of the guys in here, hit harder. And they're like, so we don't actually really know what to be doing in here. We don't know if we should be going harder, if we need to soften it up a little. And I was like, you're right. And that's where women, we need to be using our voice in these martial art classes and speaking up and not feeling bad about it. Like owning the fact, like, don't kick me that hard. Or if we're doing this drill, like, only go 15%, or I'm more sensitive. Like I actually did these front kicks again with a guy, and I said, only working on technique. You're not doing force with this. I can't be hit forceful in this particular kick. You can go as hard as you want with a roundhouse kick, but front kicks, I just need you to just work on your technique. And he did, and it was such a beautiful experience, and it just made me realize, like, how many other areas of our life are we not communicating our needs?
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
yeah, right? Like, this is one small thing, but it's such a big area, because if you can stand up in this male-dominated sport that you love, that you want to be a part of, and you can say, I am a woman, you need to go a little bit softer. Like, you can't hit me as hard as you're hitting this 6'3", 250-pound man. You just can't. Like, you'll knock me out the window. And then to be met with that grace, it's so beautiful. And it was such a healing experience. And I've had such a wonderful time back at class.
And I really do have to say too, like, conversations like this is becoming an amazing movement. So, I mean, I started this podcast, people like yourself are listening to it, and it's changing your life. You've then gone and spoken up. Now you feel amazing. Now the guys that you've spoken to, they're much more open to maybe someone who's speaking their needs, but not as strongly as someone like you. They're kind of quietly speaking their needs, but with their body language, even if their body language is just saying, like, this is too much for me. Those guys are now amenable to noticing something like that, and that's going to then spread to other women having more amazing experiences. As we're having these conversations, there are now instructors reaching out. Shout out to Z, if she's listening, owns a gym, owns an academy, and is now thinking like, oh fuck, I have not been thinking about trauma, how to be trauma informed, but I want to be. And there's this whole movement now, as if we just keep having more and more of these conversations about where our boundaries are, what our needs are, and it's going to become normal. And so then this hugely ego-dominated sport of MMA being what it had been is going to come more back to its roots of humility, of looking after each other, which is what the traditional martial arts are, which I think has been lost a lot, but is still there. You just have to ask for it. It's that simple, but hard to do, but not hard to do, as
Yeah,
it's
so much harder. And it's funny. It's so hard. It's so hard to ask for what we want. And I think especially as women, like, we're trained, like, don't speak your needs, like, don't have boundaries, just say yes. Or, we're not taught, like, to stand up and to use our voice. And one thing, after speaking with you and just being empowered by another woman, I was like, God, I'm telling women all day to, like, set these boundaries, no more, blah, And if I'm not doing that, then who am I to be teaching this. And so for me, it was a great learning experience to also just be able to do that and to break the norm. And, you know, people are receptive in these type of situations because we really are all there for the same purpose, to train and to do what we love and to have fun. But we need to do it with a little bit of awareness, because I also love what you said, that body language says so much. You know, I would be working directly with my instructor sometime, and he's like, "Why, you know, don't tense up, don't flinch." And I was like, I'm trying to retrain 36 years of freeze and startle. It's going to take me a little bit to get to that point where I'm not like freezing up at, you know, at the thought of being hit or, you know, put in this choke or like pinned down or bear hugged. And yeah, so it's retraining like an entire lifetime of reactions, both physically and then with our words.
Yeah, there's so many layers to that. You know, I've been speaking with some of the psychologists that I work with for the Fight Back project, and one of them was like, you know, we need to be mindful of the role of psoas. So the hip flexor muscle, which when you curl up into a ball, which is the fear response, which is the dissociation posture, right? If something bad is happening to you, you curl up into a ball. How are we making sure that your relationship with that muscle then becomes positive? Because you flex your hip when you kick, and that can be a powerful thing, but it can also at the same time be a dual traumatic thing. So even something that doesn't seem like it would be traumatic to you or to somebody else might be very traumatic for somebody who has that stored trauma. And so that's where it's a full picture thing too. And I think it's really useful for people to look at speaking with someone who's trained in somatic experiencing, you know, do breath work, do combat sports, do yoga, you know, really feel into every place of every part of your body and see where is there trauma, you know, and what part of me do I need to give a little bit of extra love to, give it a lot of time to be okay with doing these things, because there's so many ways that trauma can present itself. So the more that we have these conversations, the less surprised people are when it's like, I can't do that. That's triggering for me. And someone's, you know, not going to be like, why? That someone's initial response might, because they hear these kind of conversations, be like, okay, makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, you know, one thing that we talked about was this like window of tolerance or range of resilience, however you want to describe it. And that's something that I've become very aware of through my own somatic practices in my own body, and that we, you know, that we can begin to play with. Like I had mentioned before, the exercises where we have to close our eyes and have these surprise attacks. I just completely, I'm like, okay, now I'll do something, you know, but I completely freeze up and startle, and it just, it takes me out. And so I'm like, I'm not doing those anymore. And, you know, one of the guys was like, well, what if you just closed one eye? How would that feel? And I was like, I could do that. I could close one eye. And I want to get to the point where I can work up to being able to handle the surprise attacks. But it's like, is there a part of you that can do one more little step towards this so we can increase in a very slow way? So when he said that, I was just like, wow, that was really smart. Why did I not think of that? Like, I don't have to go like from 0 to 100. I can go 0 to 25. Like, I can even just like squint. And, you know, once I get comfortable there, then I can fall into these bigger exercises. So it's really important, like being able to notice, like, at what point do you freeze, or what point do you go into pure panic and fear and terror, or what point do you start losing control and rage, and then being able to just like play with that windows of tolerance.
And, you know, you don't have to disclose even that much about yourself or your trauma. If that's very personal to you, if you're doing a combat sport and there's that situation, think about, like, imagine Steph in your head and think about what would be doable for you. And no person in the world, I think, in response to you saying, look, this eyes closed thing is too much for me, could I just have one eye closed, is going to be like, no, get out of the gym. You can't do it with just one eye closed. That's not the exercise. And if they do, leave, get on
Right.
every single review page ever, write them a 1-star review, tell the world that they shouldn't be teaching, and go find someone else, because there are 5 more academies around the corner that are caring and will be open to you taking things a little bit slower when you speak your
Absolutely.
needs.
Yes. Yes. You've got to find instructors that can meet you where you're at. And I've had conversations with both of my 2 instructors, and they are both fantastic about it. And they do push me, and they know, like, you know, how I like where I don't like to go and now, and kind of where I do, but now it's teaching the guys that I'm working with that as well. And just standing up and being like, nope, or I'm just going to go really freaking slow. Like, I want to feel what it feels like having, you know, you put your arms coming in for a side choke, because I need to know what that feels like so I don't freeze during it. Before I even go into any movements, I need to know how to not freeze. Really breaking down, you can, you know, get to the point where you can tolerate these exercises. And I know I chose, like I said, like I chose like the most like, I chose a really intense martial art, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's good. I don't know.
No, I think your story like that is just what, and stories like that is what every woman needs to hear. Because like we said, once another woman has told you and given you permission, or once you've heard it from someone else, it just becomes possible, because it's been within your world. Because someone else has done it in your world, it then is possible. And that concept, like the more you hear it, you're like, huh? And then it's like, oh no, okay. Yeah, it makes sense, right? We're all human. If another human has done it before, then you can do it too. And I think that's super empowering in of itself. We have nearly done an hour. So
Yeah.
yeah, I want to go into, or just wrap up by, what advice do you have for women wanting to start Krav Maga or wanting to take on their trauma? What should they be doing?
Okay, so those are two little beasts
Yeah.
there. So let's say Krav Maga. Like, if you want to go and you're like, wow, this sounds really interesting. I want to try this out. Go, just go. Follow that curiosity, but walk in with the knowledge that you do not have to do everything the instructor says. That instructor does not have to. You don't have to do anything that, you know, that instructor says. Like, follow your own tolerance, speak up for yourself. If you get hit too hard, say it. You know, these are all things that I kind of wish I would have known walking in. Like, I wish I could have had you know, like a year ago when I first walked into the studio. So yeah, like, here's your permission slip right now to be able to speak up for yourself. And anybody who's like, I think I have some trauma. You know, a lot of times we're working with repressed trauma, and even like repressed trauma can come out in these high intense situations. So sometimes you may not even know you have trauma, and then it comes out. But if you want to start tackling trauma, find somebody and talk to them. Like, find a therapist. I really, really, really recommend finding somebody who's somatically trained to begin your work. Like, just to begin, go talk to somebody. It's okay to ask for help. We can all heal for trauma, but we cannot do it alone. We were never meant to heal alone, ever. And so it takes a village. It really, truly takes a village to heal trauma. And just taking the first step of asking for help is the most courageous thing that you will ever do. Find somebody who's trauma informed, find a somatic experiencing practitioner, and I would highly recommend anything that gets you feeling into your body. So breath work, yoga, movement practices, anything where you can really start to feel and tune into the felt sense of how you're holding trauma in your body. Because you can talk all day, but you can't talk yourself out of being fearful and scared in the body. That needs to be released through physical practices, through movement, through feeling the feelings.